I've been telling stories for the past 20 years now, from audiovisual and television to oral storytelling as a performing artist, being a children's storyteller, a narrative writer, a story consultant, trainer, coach. I've used the form of a story in many, many ways. This year, I embarked on an exciting new journey of becoming a children's writer. I will have four picture books coming out sometime next year. So while I wait and I write some more, I have been contemplating on the roles of or role of children's literature, or particularly the kind of writer that I want to be. You see, as a storyteller, I don't distinguish between stories for children, for adults, because I feel stories are for everyone. So, what is children's literature? What stories are we seeing in picture books? How are picture books and children's books shaping the world out there? And what stories need to be told? What stories are being told? Well, to answer all of that, I have a very special guest. It is Shobha Vishwanath from Karadi Books, somebody who I have always looked up to. She's one of India's finest voices as far as children's publishing is concerned. She's also my first writing mentor because it is in her picture book writing workshop that I had the courage to write a manuscript. Now, my manuscript didn't make it through Karadi's stringent guidelines. So, but it was she and her team who helped me understand that some stories are better told orally and they never need to come back in a picture book, and it's perfectly fine. That's number one. And number two, she also made me realize that my approach to writing a story for a child is to write it from the teller's version. So I will write it the way I would tell it, and then I would work backwards to make it into a picture book. So all this and much more, that's as much as I've discovered by working and interacting with Shobha at a one-on-one level. So I'm so excited, Shobha, that you've agreed to come on the Story Way Perspective. Thank you so much for saying yes.
Thank you, Ritu. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's always wonderful to talk about things that are closest to your heart, and in this case, storytelling and picture books. So, really, really delighted to be here.
Lovely, lovely. So let's rewind a bit. Let's go back to when you started. I believe you're trained in special education, and that's something which I didn't know when since the time I've known you and Karadi. In fact, I discovered it a few years back. So I believe it was while you were working in the US that you discovered audiobooks. And when you came back to India, you were looking for audiobooks, but you didn't have that. And that's when you decided to get into audiobooks and make storybooks for children. So take us back into the origin story of Karadi, really.
Um, so when we started, like as you probably know, we just celebrated 20 years of Karadi Tales last month in June. And I mean, time's just flown past, of course. And it just seemed to me like yesterday that we had returned from the US and I was out shopping for audiobooks for my son, and I didn't find any. We started basically, that was the impetus, although not the only one. We did want to do something with sound and music and
Hmm.
storytelling. This was our agenda, and because I was so familiar with the format of the audiobook because I had so much exposure with it in buying them for my son and listening to it along with him. We thought that was something that we would first start out with. Otherwise, the whole idea of setting up a publishing house, it was more a music publishing house where we wanted to do several genres of music, and as a part of the music publishing, stories for children would be one segment of it. But as you can see, that's where we've continued to be for 28 years, because that was a rather long reach, and this itself took up a lot of our time and energy. So we started with the audiobook format for multiple reasons. I, of course, came from, like you said, a special ed background where my specialization was with visually impaired children. And therefore, the use of audiobooks, a lot of it with that population, also gave me a better glimpse into what can be done in a manner of storytelling. That was one. Two, of course, my I continue to think that it was a huge catalyst for my son's speed reading, and because he was reading from the time he was 3 and 4, And so that was one was, of course, with my background in special ed. Two was also that I did dabble a bit in writing. I used to be a journalist prior to that, and then with my education background and also working with children, I had some exposure to that. The third and most important thing was that I was married into a family of musicians. So my husband and his siblings and his parents, they were all musicians, and not just musicians, music as a hobby. I mean, if you ever ask them that is music your hobby, they would be kind of I don't know, almost insulted, I would say, because when something, it's as much to them as it is uh, the profession that brings home, I don't know, the bacon, so to speak. So they continue to be very, very serious musicians. And so for us to create the audiobook, much of the strength lay in house,
Hmm.
that we didn't have to go outsourcing so many things. And that was actually the genesis of Karadi Tales. We were not called Karadi Tales when we started. We used to be called Sky Music India Private Limited, which, like you say, you suggested, was a music publishing house under which audiobooks were supposed to be a part of it.
You are talking about 20 years back in time when there were no let's say you had to make CDs and maybe cassettes at that point of time.
Cassettes, yeah, audio
Cassettes, yes,
cassettes,
yes,
yeah,
cassettes. I
yeah,
have heard songs, children's songs and rhymes and stories, audio stories in cassettes,
yeah,
and in my childhood, but I didn't listen to any Karate tales back then because of course I'm not as young as but you were thinking of let's say technology where nobody
right,
else was thinking of technology. So
right,
and that too reimagining the story as a form and a format to be consumed
right,
in a certain way. So
right,
let's talk about the making of this, because today we have so many different audio platforms to listen to stories in, and there is
right,
podcast and audiobooks and all kinds of things. But when you were sort of reimagining, I'm calling it reimagining because you didn't see the traditional Panchatantra tales as the regular Panchatantra tales. You were imagining with sound and with music and
right.
with melodies and things with a chorus which children would also sing. There were words which had to
Yes,
be simple. You wanted it
right,
to be sticky with children. So all of that. So there is one form that when you pick a story, you choose to put it into a picture book. You have to imagine it in a certain form. And when you pick
right.
that same story for, let's say, an audio book, you have to reimagine it in another form. So could you just tell us something about the two formats of storytelling that you started
Yeah.
working with?
Yeah, absolutely. And you sort of hit the nail on the head, because our earlier books were longer books. Like when we first started, the length of an audiobook for us was, the audio ran to 22 minutes or 26
Hmm.
minutes. So the word count of a story was anywhere from 1200 to 1500 words. But at 1200 to 1500 words for a picture book is way too high. Um,
Yes.
as you know, the word count of a picture book is anywhere from 0 to maybe 500, or at best, if you stretch it, it becomes 7 or 800. And in a picture book, as you know, the pictures tell so much of the story, right? And therefore the text is kept short and succinct uh, and heartfelt, and
Hmm.
the pictures do the rest of the story. But when you are, it comes to something that we've discussed earlier, that what's the difference between storytelling and how it is told in a picture book. A storyteller has a lot of words at her disposal or his disposal, and so the words are the ones that have to provoke the imagination and the visuals, while in a picture book the pictures have to do that work. So in writing for an audiobook, there is also the consideration of that, what would you have to keep the soundscape in mind. So
Yeah.
what is it that, where it's a little bit like writing even a screenplay, because you have to position, our audiobooks also had songs in them, so the protagonist also breaks into song here and there, like a Bollywood film, or there is a shlok that gets chanted the background when maybe Krishna's being taken across the river, and the whatever the Yamuna paths its ways. So there are all these situational songs which you have to keep in mind when you write an audiobook, or it is with keeping that in mind that the story itself is constructed. And of course, add to that is a great narrator who does the story. So we did when we started with Nasiruddin Shah as our first Karadi the Bear, and it was analog recording at the time, which means there was not no cut paste stuff that was happening. We would sit and rehearse the story with different characters playing different people playing different characters in the story. So if you had a story like maybe the foolish lion or the blue jackal, that there would be other characters in the story as well, and we would sit and do like a play reading of with all the actors present, and we would go into the studio, and with different mics each one would read it like a radio play. So there
Hmm.
was, and if you went wrong with something, it had to be re-recorded all over
Redone
the
completely, yes.
again. It's not like now chalo koi baat nahi, ek aur take, and let's
Right.
cut the bits
Cut
and
it.
put it where. Yeah, and it was on tape. The recording was done on those spools which had tape. So if you actually had to cut, you had to physically cut the tape and join them. And from there, and these would then be made into cassettes or put into cassettes where one side of the tape was one story and the other side was another story. The difference in the kind of audiobooks that we did, and you probably will, I don't know, get to asking me this later, and I think I'm preempting you, is that our audiobooks were never only about listening to the story. Our audiobook was also about listening to the story along with the book.
Yeah.
So the children always had the books in front of them, or the adult, and even for a non reader, the cue to turn the page was given by Karadi's stick or chhadi. Every time Karadi tapped his cane, the child knew that it was time to turn the page. So it was very interesting, and the combination of all of this put together with the sound, the pictures, the music, and these little cues for page turn kind of all culminated into the child being at some point being able to read the story, because the story is there in his or her memory, and knowing when it was time to turn the page, and as expressively and as effectively as Nasiruddin Shah.
Oh my God.
you know
And I can totally imagine it, whether a child is able to read or not able to read, the experience of having a picture book in your hand and having this immersive experience of a fantastic voice telling you that story, irrespective of the fact that whether your parent or your grandparent had the time to sit with you and the book and maybe do as good a reading, let's not go there, but at
right,
least do a reading in their own way, which is fantastic and works always
exactly.
best. But if you don't have that, you have such a fantastic, let's say, a storyteller coming and telling you that story in his voice, and that creates a surround sound and a, let's say, and a beautiful environment for the child to experience
Yeah,
that book.
yeah.
You also had some fantastic narrators, Shobha, and brilliant
Yeah,
ones. Why don't you tell us
yeah.
something about that?
So yeah, so we started with Nasir, and it was just so wonderful because he was so absolutely gracious in the way he accepted this role. And I think even the last narrator who comes on board for the Karadi's audiobook telling, or as Karadi's avatar, is because that Nasir gave the voice for the first book. That, yeah, and that established the brand.
Right.
And Nasir himself says that if you are ever to do a podcast with him as a storyteller, because he's a fabulous storyteller, he'll tell you that there are two or three things in my entire life, if I am going to be remembered by, or which I think are my, highlights of my career. And one of them is, of course, Karadi Tales. He says, wherever I travel, it's always that somebody who comes to me and says that I heard you as the blue jackal, or I heard you as in Monkey and the Crocodile. So it's So after Nasir, we had Sai Jafri, who was again a brilliant, and later we discovered, although it was not a conscious decision we made, that somehow that the people we picked to be the voice of Karadi were actually primarily theatre actors, because of which their voice control and voice modulation, because they had to throw the voice and speak with your voice, was so good that it just somehow was such a good fit for Karadis.
Your books also travel across the world, and they carry a little tag which we are now so proud of, called Made in India. But while it is a Made in India book, what is the quintessential Indian children's book, if you were to describe it to anyone who's sitting maybe somewhere abroad, who's not used to children's books from India, because there is a lot of, let's say, perception, a lot of idea about what India is all about. But if they chance upon an Indian children's book, and particularly a Karadi Tales book, what should they expect?
Um, so I know it's a question that have been asked, and I think about it, and I think the answer to this, maybe 15 or 20 years back when we started Curry Details, or even before that, would have been different than what it is today, because the world is growing much
Mm.
smaller. What we know of other countries is so much more today than what we did before the internet sprang upon us, not just the internet, with OTT platforms which offer us stories from across the world, not just for children but even for adults, which give us exposure to what Finnish sounds like, or Icelandic language sounds like, or Japanese or Korean. I mean, I think the people who watch K drama would be very easily be able to differentiate between Korean and Chinese. While I don't know, a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So when you ask what is the quintessential Indian book, those definitions are changing and they continue to change. But I would say if the setting of the story reflects what is India, if the cultural elements in the story reflects what is uniquely Indian, if the characters in the story reflect how we look, how we traditionally look, and maybe that's not, if you look at what is quintessentially India, I mean, I might still wear jeans and t-shirts, but there is a manner in which probably I eat my food, or the what food I eat. So all of these are what would constitute a story that is quintessentially Indian. Otherwise, I would say that a story from any part of the world resonates with a child, not because its characters are Indian or the setting is Indian or because the people look Indian, but because that the emotional resonance with that story is what is 100% there, or they are able to connect to, so if I write a story that is completely about making of an Indian dish or a recipe, it won't resonate to a child somewhere in Europe or in Africa. But if I was to take that recipe and made a story around it, like a tukpa for all.
Tukpa. I was thinking of Tukpa while you were saying this.
Yeah, or like a tukpa, then there is a connection that because the story is not about that it is set in Ladakh or that it is about a blind child. It is about the community, about this child inviting all these people to his house and the generosity of that community, which for me is the strongest point of tukpa. The
Absolutely.
blindness of the child is second, the setting is second, and that it's told by a child is also not as important as to what does the story communicate to us. That yes, that in a little village, it's the village that raises the child, and so the village is the family, and so all the people in the village can be invited home if grandmother's making tukpa.
The Storied Way perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag podcasting network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com. From Tuk, I'll take you to another series that you're working on. So, and I'll set the context for it. So, last week I attended Nobel laureate Esther Duflo's launch of her book for children
Right.
called Poor Economics for Kids. And while
Right.
listening to the writer and the illustrator talk about that book, I realized that sometimes children's books are important so that they simplify complex things, not just for children, but for us adults too. Because some things have not been told to us when we were kids. We were expected to
Right.
learn about it, study about it academically, or read newspapers, or speak to intelligent people to figure things out for ourselves, and then perhaps say that okay, this is not for us, or it's too difficult for children to understand, and don't agree that even
Totally.
we don't. But
Exactly.
your books, your association with Pari, the People's Archive of Rural India, they are set in a very special, let's say, segment of picture book or children's books, not picture books,
Right.
children's books in India. And I had the privilege of taking one of them for a reading program and taking it to a school in Gurgaon. And
Oh,
children were
lovely.
amazed that their vegetable vendors, they don't think about where do their vegetables come from, but if they do, they don't look at them as entrepreneurs who have stories of their own. And that sort of set the context of okay, have you wondered where are their vegetables coming from and what have they done to be there with you, and imagine you don't have any vegetables to eat, and they're very happy with that. But
Right.
the point is just that I made them go and speak to their vegetable vendor and get their story out, because I gave them
Wow.
the background of what the Pari books are all about. So
Nice.
tell us about your books, and what do you hope that the books will do in the hands of children, in the hands of readers, children or adults, whosoever.
Right, right. So, the genesis of this story series, we call them Story, STORI, Stories of Rural India, which is uh, Sainath. I also attended a lecture of his in IIT Madras, and I was so blown away by, of course, the way he speaks and the infinite knowledge that he has about agrarian India or about rural India. And I, just knowing nothing almost, about it as an adult. And and when People's Archive of Rural India was launched, and then it archives stories of rural India from anyone who wants to send it. So if I travel to a rural part of India and I find something interesting there, I could do a write up and send it to the editors, and they would, polish it up and put it up as if it is, mm, if it merits being in the archive of rural India. So while I was going through the with the various stories I was posting, which were all journalistic reports, or they were reportages of people who were sending in stories, and I found that some of them were like absolutely so fascinating. And why is it that so many of us don't know so many things of it? And of course, I did not even dare hope that whether a child would know of it. So
Hmm.
we got in touch with Sainath, and I asked Sainath, shall we convert this into chapter books, maybe books that are 8 to 10,000 words in length, but a little bit of a fictional element has to be put in it to make the story engaging and interesting. And of course, he was more than happy to do it. So what we did was we signed up with the journalists themselves who wrote those reports and asked them if they would like to, convert it into a chapter book length book. And of course, they were very, very happy to do it. So our first series of 5 books were done by the journalists themselves. Uh, for me, every book was a learning, whether it was set in Tamil Nadu or whether it was set in any other part of the world. These were stories about farmers, these were stories about migrants, these were stories about, disability. These were people about children with HIV who did not probably have a school to go to. And the amount of work that is being done, and about the children in these communities. Ritu, I can't, even as I'm talking to you, I'm getting goosebumps, is the kind of resilience that they have. And not like, अरे ये हमारे साथ क्या हो गया है, kind of a thing, but just that this is the set of cards that has been given to us, and what how do we make the best out of it. So in a
Mm.
book like No Nonsense Nandini, a young girl who's married very early in her life loses her husband, and by the time her husband has died, she already has two children, and with these two children she takes on the job of farming, and then kind of diversifies into growing flowers, and how she wakes up at some 3 o'clock or 2:30 in the morning to harvest these flowers. And we just don't know anything. We have grand weddings in which we have
Use
these flowers
flowers. Oh
as
my God.
malas,
Yes, yes.
and I was thinking, these are stories that children must 100% must know. It's not, and our urban stories kind of sometimes like tokenism touch upon these characters in rural India. They don't become protagonists themselves,
Hmm.
or they don't get to tell their stories, and an urban kid only sees largely himself or herself represented in all these books.
Right.
These children don't get voices, don't get representation, and the diversity of the kinds of people and environments that rural India offers was something that definitely needed to be told. In the Pari series, what has happened is that for every child, it's like a they don't make a big deal about it. They just live through it. They fight it. They come out of it. They are happy in it. It's not like they're sitting with their head in their hands and saying, "Oh my God, मेरे साथ ऐसा क्यों हुआ है?" kind of thing. So. So the stories are not just a window or a glimpse into different kinds of children, different kinds of environments, but also the kinds of resilience that these children portray,
Hmm.
and what they come out with. So our pitch is to all the schools, whether they are IB schools or CBSE schools or IGCSE schools, to please adopt these books and use them as explorations, as areas of discussion, as because you don't know what will touch which child and where it will take off from there.
Yes, yes. And I think, so this is something which I do, Shobha, is that I feel that all of us are living in a story of our own lives. So
Right.
we are influenced by what we see every day, what we experience every day, wherever we go, our choices in our life, all of that guide the narrative that we are living. Sometimes when you
Absolutely.
get out of that narrative, which is when you either watch a film or read a book, and sometimes walk into another person's life which is so different from yours, and you start to
Yours.
wonder that, oh my God, look at their life, this is something which I never imagined. You start going,
Right.
when that story ends and you come back to your life, you start
Yeah.
looking at other people differently. And I think as adults, many of us are not able to do it as well, but children are able to do it. They are far more connected to what's happening around them,
Possibly.
and they may
Yeah. Yeah.
question things which they don't have people to talk to, which is why a
Correct.
children's book sort of opens up those answers or those experiences that they are
Right.
craving, right? So there is a different
Exactly.
way children and
Exactly.
adults consume
Totally.
books,
Totally.
isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, so it's largely empathy building, the storehouse of empathy building with this series of books. And well, I hope, we are, of course, many schools have already adopted it, like the school that you went
Hmm.
to.
Hmm.
And yeah, we just have to bring it to the attention of more school heads, more educators, more, and
Right.
a podcast like this will be so fabulous for such a thing.
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Let's talk about another book, which is one of my favorite books from Karadi Tales, which is A Pair of Twins. I think I've told that to you
Ah,
several times.
yeah,
I've mentioned it to Kavita, who wrote it, and I told
right.
her the backstory. So I've used this book several times with children,
Hmm.
with grown-ups, with psychology students, with
Right,
let's say entrepreneurs, with gender-based conversations at workplaces. What are you not allowed to do? What would happen if you were not born of the gender that you're able to, that
right,
you're born with,
right.
or you identify with? All of this. So my question to you, Shobha, is
So
when you make a
fabulous. Yeah,
children's book, do you look
yeah.
at it from how an adult would consume that story, or do you look at it from a child's perspective alone?
See, finally, it's the adult who's buying the book.
Yeah.
One must always keep that in mind. But having said that, it's very interesting that you bring up a book like A Pair of Twins, because on the other hand, we have a book called The Boy Who Wore Bangles. Okay, now, of course, it is the story is told from the protagonist is a little boy who wants to wear bangles, and then I look to see as to what would be the parents' approach in buying such a book, you know. Um, in India, and if you're looking at the larger middle class, okay, and I don't even want to categorize it as a middle class or a upper middle class or whatever class it is, the they will approach a book like this first with trepidation, with a little bit of fear. Should I bring this? Should I buy this book and show it to my son? Will he tomorrow ask to wear bangles? you know, which is uh, which is crazy, because that's not what the book is setting out to do. The book is just asking you actually to look at gender differently. It's not, it's about what are the things that traditionally we have fixed that boys should do or girls should do or boys can do and girls can do, to break out of that box. It's not about tomorrow my son will ask to wear bangles, you
Hmm.
know
Hmm.
but in so therefore I would say, just like A Pair of Twins, I would encourage even storytellers to use books like these, like The Boy Who Wore Bangles, and to actually start with the question, would you buy this book for your son who's 5 years old?
Absolutely.
you know
Yes.
and the answers, if people are really honest, there are more no's than yes. And this is, we have to acknowledge this. There is no judgment here, but we have to acknowledge that this is the market that you are creating books for. So, how many publishers would be like, I know Pickle Yoke Books has done some rather brave books,
Hmm. Hmm.
that whether it is, and the numbers, of course, always speak for themselves, that it is. How many books, the books might go on to win awards, but that's again a different matter, because the
Yes.
awards are also being judged by a certain category of readers and people. But would, you know the man on the street, so to speak, the aam admi, would he pick up this book and say, is this a book I want to introduce to my child?
Which is where I think the gap is, Shobha, because when you tell
Mm,
stories in a picture book, it's there for somebody to pick up. The book doesn't speak for itself. But
right,
sometimes, whether the writer talks, when the publisher talks, when people like us, storytellers, when we take this book and we make it about something that people should think about, that's
right,
when they start looking at that story differently. That, oh, I never
differently,
thought of
yeah,
it like this. I never I didn't read the book like this, because everybody's assumption is a book or a story should teach a moral to a child. So which is
right.
where, in this case, if it's a direct implication that, okay, you should wear, boys should wear bangles, though, oh, you think my child will start wearing bangles? I mean, it's not as simple as that in real life, we all
No,
know that.
hardly. In
But
fact,
they make it about that. They
yeah,
make it about
correct,
that. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
Or
which is
even
which is
like,
something that even I keep questioning everybody, that why do
right,
we assume that the story will only do its work like the way you think it will do? It can work very
right,
differently on a child's mind, like with A Pair of Twins. One
right.
child, while reading it, how, and I was telling this, we were reading it together, and this child just stopped me and said, I have a question. I said, yes. I said, did these children go to school? So I said,
Interesting, yeah.
no, I didn't think of it,
Mm,
because, and I pride myself for having thought a lot of things which the children would ask. So I didn't think of that question, and I said, very interesting, but why do you say so? He said, well, because if they had gone to school, maybe they would have wanted to grow up to be something else. You
Ah,
see, such a brilliant
yeah,
way of looking at a story and thinking
yeah,
like a child, because a child has that insight that even we don't have as adults.
yeah.
I'm telling the
Or
story from a different way.
yeah, or absolutely, or even to provoke the conversation further to say, but what is wrong in becoming a mahout, a
Having
tender of
studied.
elephants? Yeah,
Exactly, yes,
having studied,
having
exactly. Yeah,
studied, so
yeah,
those kind of, and
yeah,
again, and children are much sharper. They know that
yeah,
if this kid has a better earning potential somewhere else, will
right.
she sort of give it up to do something which is not economically sustainable,
Economically viable, exactly.
viable
Yeah,
after a certain point of time?
yeah,
And
yeah.
is it all right? And again, traditional trades versus modern
Yeah,
professions.
so
So
interesting
much,
that you're
so
talking
much
about
that
this.
one.
Yeah,
And yes, and what happens is when you have a different age group of children, it's not just 10 to 13-year olds listening. There's a
correct,
5-year old and a
correct.
7-year old,
Right,
and maybe
right,
a 14-year-old who's a little too smart.
right.
So all of these kids having a conversation about things like that, the value
Absolutely,
of
absolutely.
maybe studying or not studying, having a dream, having being denied something. So all of this
Correct.
helps children have conversation.
Right. Yeah, no, so in that regard also, I'm glad in the manner in which picture books are now evolving, at least in India, that
Hmm.
earlier they would always be that value or moral or lesson, and now it is less so. Sure, there are publishers that still do it, but at least the independent publishers are really looking for their books to just tell a story, and if there is a subtext or a value to be gleaned from it, it's left to the child. It's not so overt or on your face, that so I kind of like that. Yeah,
Yes, I like I like the space that we are in,
yeah.
which takes me to the next question, is that you've been conducting these writers workshop with new writers who've never written for
Hmm.
children before. So, and I attended one of them and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Tell me, what is your purpose behind nurturing and mentoring new writers, and what are you looking for? Like you mentioned that we are no longer telling stories with morals and things and
Right.
all that and the other. So, what kind of children's stories are you looking for? And you could answer that both as a maybe a reader, a writer, editor, publisher,
Right.
picture book lover, however you'd
Right.
like to call it.
Yeah. So, see, the picture book workshop arose largely from actually even sensitizing this person who thinks they want to write a story for children, to tell them what a picture book is, that it's not a story book. There's a different genre called a picture book. So one is to sensitize people or to make them aware of really what a picture book is and how a picture book should be seen, read, enjoyed, and then only you come to the business of writing, because you have to know that format first. You have to understand it. Lots of people are buying picture books, and of course it's less so than before, where people always liked in India omnibuses or compendiums, 7 8 stories together, and with a drawing here and there, and they would say, why would I pay so much money for a single picture book when I'm getting so many stories in a single book? Because again, it's not judgmental. This whole genre of the picture book itself is relatively new to India. We are fundamentally oral storytellers. Our storytelling began that way, under the banyan tree, under the peepal tree, or under the tamarind tree. We told, and our telling had song and dance and expressions and movement and all of that. Now you're taking that big thing and reducing it to a picture book, and I would say reducing in a nice way, because now the storyteller under the banyan tree has long gone, and where are the banyan trees, first of all, and where's the space to sit under the banyan tree? So it's reduced to the picture book. So for a very 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 long time, even now, for many adults, a a children's book is called a story book.
Yes.
Yeah, and I, in a picture book, I love humor. I mean, I always think that even a sad story gets a certain poignancy when it's laced with humor. I love stories which are humorous. I love stories which touch upon a certain what do you call, um, an emotion, whether it is love or loss or longing, whichever it is, in a manner that it's sort of, it's not like on your face, it shows more than it tells, you know.
Hmm.
So I'm always looking for writing that is unique, that is lyrical, and that combined with the illustration just dazzles you. Doesn't happen all the time. So while we do publish a lot of picture books, there are some picture books that kind of hit that, you know, hit that of that balance of all of this, and happens beautifully. Yeah. So yeah, and I do collect a lot of picture books,
I do
and
that
I'm
too.
always and I'm
I
always
do that
reading.
too.
Yeah. Mm.
I'm always carrying a big suit. I've got so many stories of lugging, these the 30-kilo suitcases full of books, picture books, to all kinds of places where trains don't
Yeah,
stop and
yeah,
you have to
yeah.
run up. Either you to, and then there's a call that, do you get up on the train? Do you leave your suitcase full of books? I said, no, I can't leave my suitcase full of books on the
Yeah,
platform.
yeah,
I need to
yeah.
take them with
Running
me.
out
So
of
I have.
bookshelves and
Oh my God.
spaces
Oh,
to
those
keep
things
books.
happen to
Yeah,
me. And lots and lots
yeah,
of stories I have for that.
yeah.
28 years, Shobha. What would you say is Karadi's contribution to children's books in India? What have you been able to do if you were to sum it up?
I think it's a question that perhaps one must ask not the publisher, but but the consumer of the books. But in I think when we started Karadi Tales as an audiobook, there was some blessing that, like the hand of grace that was upon us. And I'll tell you why. Because the audio that we created at that time for the books have kind of, what does one say, walked over or transcended to so many different formats. The audio remains perennial. It went on to become videos. You know, we use the audio. It's gone on to Audibles and Spotify's and all of these different kind of avatars that the audio took, which required also that the storytelling then kind of was not limited to the book, the
Hmm.
physical book,
Hmm.
that it could be used for all of this. So, our storytelling via audiobooks is what we are even remembered today for. So, if I go to the Delhi Book Fair and a 25-year-old comes to me, says, "Oh my God, I grew up on Karadi Tales," you know, that kind of a thing. And there are people walking up who will sing the songs. So I think the music and the story telling as an audio format is the greatest impact, I think, that we have made in terms of, and in terms of that, people remembering the publishing house as opposed to a title of a book is something that we've done. It's a little similar, I would say, to an Amar Chitra Katha, where people remember, won't say, "Oh, I've read Krishna by so and so. I don't even know who wrote that Krishna." But I will remember Amar Chitra Katha comics as something, a set of books that inspired, informed my history, informed my myths and gods and goddesses. So Karadi Tales is, I think, one of those publishing houses which will be remembered as a publishing house far more than it will be remembered as a, even amongst the masses. Like in the industry, we all know who publishes what.
Hmm.
Duckbill puts out these
Hmm.
books, or
Hmm.
Penguin puts out these books, or Tulika puts out these books.
Everybody has their space. Everybody
Yeah,
has their
but
space.
Karadi Tales is just seen as like everything that goes under the basket of Karadi Tales. So definitely in the landscape of Indian literature, we as publishers have made an indelible mark. There is, and I'm telling it very humbly, like very objectively. Definitely it is, because if one was to Google who are the publishers in children's publishers in India, there's no way Karadi will not pop up, you know. Yeah, so I think, and I mean, this is so important, and I ought to have told this, but I think the context didn't come up with Karadi Path, which is
Yeah.
our educational wing, that these books, which would have probably reached only a certain kind of population, now has made its way across India to about 18 or 20 states in India, to children who fall out of this segment, you know, to rural children, to disadvantaged populations of children, to tribal kids, to government kids, because it is all these books with their audio that's being used to teach English in all across these
Across
environments.
these schools, of course.
Across
So
these environments.
that's
So
that's
I
that's the
feel
very
that,
beautiful thing that I think you are doing and some other publishers are doing, which is to make the books for people who
right,
need the books more than those who can afford the books. So I think
exactly,
that
exactly,
so that's where the Indian publishing story is. Who are these
right.
books for, and what
Who
are
are
they
these
doing
books
for?
for?
Who are these
Exactly,
books for, and what are they
exactly.
doing for
Yeah.
them? Yes, and that's so inspiring, really. To you as a no, being like, for example, a lot of people kept asking me, when are you writing your book? When are you writing your book? I said, why do I need to write? I'm very happy telling. And is that not
Right.
why I became a storyteller? I it doesn't satisfy me to see my name on a book, and that may be the ego
Right.
trip for a lot of people, because I love being with children and telling them stories. But it just happened that the book happened and things like that. But I keep telling myself that I don't see myself making a lot of money as a children's writer either. that,
No,
so
there's a
why?
writer, unless you're Rowling or somebody, you
Oh
know, and that
yes,
too, I mean, yeah, or an Eric Carle or somebody who's, but not otherwise, definitely not
otherwise
as,
yes.
uh, and as far as the other aspect is concerned, one is the entrepreneurship in terms of money, the other is you as a storyteller. See, everything is a story. We know that a newspaper report is a story,
Mm.
a movie is a story, and if your story is got emotional resonance, I always tell that if I am sitting here and I'm not able to connect to you, doesn't matter how good, how well researched your story is, it's not, you're going to lose me out as an audience. Open mindedness, I think, is so important, is to just look at open mindedness. Of course, we would like our audiences also to be open minded, not just as storytellers for us to be open minded. But if your skill and your craft is good and honed, of course you will have an audience that is going to be captivated by your storytelling, which I think it already is. I mean, I know that you are an excellent storyteller, Ritu. I mean, I think we should probably find more ways of working together, which I'm always telling. I do wish you were not based in Delhi but more closer to the south. Yeah. So always so
The
hard for us
storyteller
to.
transports, we are
Yeah,
time travelers. We can
yeah,
travel back in time. We can travel through space and get anywhere wherever you want us to do.
yeah.
It'll be my privilege to work with Karadi, and definitely perhaps write something which is worthy of being published and being picked up. But yes, I'm working very hard on my writing as I
Yeah.
say this to you. So thank you, Shobha, for speaking to me. I did not expect our conversation to go so deep and so intense in terms of the honesty with which you spoke, which I did not expect that you would open so much of your heart to answer these questions, because have been sort of taking mental notes, because a lot of what you said is the way even I look at the world of stories. And anyone who wants to whether work with children as a writer, as a children's storyteller, needs to sort of look at the way they look at the world and the kind of stories, because they also become gatekeepers, right? People like you and me also become gatekeepers of the kind of stories we choose to tell the children that we work with. So I think we need to first realign and understand how do we look at the world of stories and what stories need to be taken to the children. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too.
Thank you so much, Ritu. It was a pleasure being here. when we talk about things that matter to us, and that I don't know, that we've lived all our lives building and learning and sharing, from one storyteller to another. I wish you all the best, and may our tribe grow, really.
Yes,
Thank you very, very
absolutely.
much. Yeah.
Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.